Sylvia Rivera was a gay liberation and transgender rights activist. Rivera was assigned male at birth, but first identified as a drag queen and then later as a transgender woman later on in her life, although she was not very fond of labels. Throughout her lifetime, Sylvia advocated for the rights of transgender people, as well as pushed for the reform of systemic racism and poverty within these communities. Rivera was born on July 2, 1951 in the Bronx, New York, to a Puerto Rican father and a Venezuelan mother, but was raised by her grandmother due to the absence of her father and the death of her mother. When Rivera was young, she began experimenting with clothing and makeup, but often suffered from violent bullying at school and beatings at home. Because of her difficult home life, Rivera ran away from home at just 11 years old and unfortunately became a victim of child prostitution. In 1963, however, Rivera met a group of drag queens and subsequently Marsha P. Johnson, and this encounter completely changed her life. After meeting the queer icon that is Marsha P. Johnson, Rivera began to embrace her queer identity even more and started to go by Sylvia. And she began to participate in various gay rights activities. Johnson had such a deep impact on Rivera, with Rivera stating that she, Johnson, was like a mother to me. Then, on June 28, 1969, one of the most important events in gay rights history, the Stonewall Inn riots, occurred. The police raids at Stonewall, a gay bar, started a series of protests and resistance against police brutality towards queer individuals. Here, many transgender people and drag queens were at the front lines of the protest, and Rivera was, allegedly, the second to throw a Molotov cocktail in protest of the raids. Her presence there has been disputed, but the role that transgender people played in the raids is not to be ignored. After the turning point of the Stonewall Inn, many pride parades began to take place in 1970. However, Rivera and other transgender people were discouraged from attending, facing discrimination within their own community. In 1973, Rivera participated in the Gay Pride Parade, but was not allowed to speak, even though she had pushed so heavily for acceptance. This is when Rivera had had enough and delivered her infamous "Y'all better quiet down" speech. It's said that Rivera ripped the microphone away and said if it wasn't for drag queens like her, then there would be no gay liberation movement. She said that she had taken beatings, been arrested, lost her job and housing, all to be treated lesser than by the same people she had fought relentlessly for. After this event, Rivera still hit walls within the gay rights movement, with groups such as the Gay Activist Alliance directly refusing to acknowledge the work many transgender people were doing. Not only was she facing discrimination within her community, but also within gay rights legislation, and she fought for bills like the Sexual Orientation Non-Discrimination Act to include protection for transgender people. Marsha P. Johnson and Rivera decided that enough was enough, and that if they weren't going to be accepted into these spaces, then they were going to create them. In 1971, the two created the Street Transvestite Action Revolutionaries, or STAR. It became a community dedicated to discussing issues that the transgender community in New York City was facing. After identifying a need for food and shelter in their community, soon the organization transformed into the Star House, a place where housing, clothing, and food were provided for queer youth in need. Rivera was only 19 years old. Along with the creation of the Star House, Rivera was a member of the Gay Liberation Front, which was an organization dedicated to the fight for inclusion of all queer identities. Unfortunately, the struggles of her past followed Rivera. She had fought with substance abuse and her mental health for years and suffered from burnout of advocacy. So she left New York City for a while to recover. However, she soon returned once she heard of Marsha P. Johnson's passing. After returning to the city, Rivera dived back into her advocacy and started the Transy House in 1997, which followed a similar creed to the Star House. Here she stayed and continued to march and protest for the rights of the LGBTQ+ community until she died in 2002 from liver cancer. Even in death, Rivera's name is continuing to fight for justice through the Sylvia Rivera Law Project, founded in 2002. This project works to guarantee that all people are free to self-determine their gender identity and expression, regardless of income or race, and without facing harassment, discrimination, or violence. The group provides to services, access to legal services to gay, trans, and gender fluid individuals, while also teaching leadership and advocacy skills, and is a testament to Rivera's legacy. Rivera is also memorialized with her portrait being added to the National Portrait Gallery in Washington, D.C., making her the first transgender person to be included in the gallery and her name to be remembered.